This video will look at system security. So we've already seen how a network brings a lot. This video will look at system security. So we've already seen how networking brings a lot of advantages. However, because all computers are connected together in a network, it means that if someone's able to access one computer, they could in fact have access to all data on all devices on the entire network. That's if they know what they're doing, and if there's not enough security in place. And that's often what criminals will want to do. So it's really important that we understand what the risks are and have certain measures in place to try and reduce those risks. So we're going to have a little look now at several threats to a network. So let's start off with malware. So malware is any software which can harm a computer or a user. And there's a range of different types of malware. You've got viruses, you've got spyware, you've got adware, you've got farming. So if we look at viruses, viruses are small programs and their whole purpose is to cause physical harm to a computer system. They get confused with spyware sometimes, but spyware doesn't really harm the system, it just harms the user by trying to record data about them. But viruses, it's all about physical harm to a computer system. And there are different types. You've got a standard virus, they hide in files, they replicate themselves in order to spread into other programs and files, and often their aim is to damage data or delete data. You've got worms. They don't necessarily delete data, but what they do when they replicate themselves is they use more and more of the computer resources, slowing that computer down and making it not work as you would like it to. And you've got Trojan viruses as well, and they're often disguised as useful programs, perhaps a game that you might want to use, but in the background they might be causing harm. They might be deleting your files, making annoying changes, or perhaps creating a portal for other users to use in order to gain access to your system. Now spyware, as we've just discussed very briefly, its aim is to spy on the user and send back information that it collects about them, perhaps finding out what their passwords are. If it records the same characters being entered over and over again, it might recognize that as a password. It might be sending back usernames, websites you visit, and so on. And a common piece of spyware is a keylogger. So as I've just said, it's the software which will record all the keys that you hit on a keyboard. So if you type in the same set of characters over and over again, they may well be able to identify that as your password. And the main reason for collecting this data is so that senders of the spyware can use your information, perhaps to steal your identification, or perhaps to sell your information to third parties who can then target you with adverts. So another type of malware that you need to be aware of is adware. So this is where it will target you with unwanted adverts and collect marketing information about your online habits. They might also redirect you to unwanted websites by changing your home page. Farming is another type of malware. Now we saw a few videos back about what DNS was and how every time you type in a URL into your browser, your URL would then be looked up in a DNS database, and the corresponding IP address for the website that you're looking for would be sent back to you so that you could visit that website. Now with farming, what the software will do is it will change the IP address stored in DNS, so every time you try to go to a particular website, it will redirect you to another. Now scareware, another type of malware. This comes in the form of a pop-up. It might say that you've got a virus, and then it will say, but don't worry, come and buy this software and the virus will disappear. So it's really a way of trying to get your money. There's ransomware, where your computer will be locked and make it useless, and then they will say, we will unlock your computer if you pay us a sum of money. And that's what happened to the NHS a little while back. And you've got rootkits. Now these are sets of hacking tools which once installed will allow a criminal to pretty much do anything they want to your computer if they can then gain access to your computer. Now phishing is a method that criminals use to try and acquire sensitive information about you. They'll often come in the form of perhaps some direct electronic communication, perhaps an email, and the email will look legitimate, or perhaps a phone call, and they will try and impersonate legitimate companies and ask you to give away certain sensitive information. And again, the main reason will be as part of identity theft. So for example, you may have an email which looks like it's from PayPal. It asks you to enter your account details. You do that, and then they will have your PayPal account details and can hack your account. So we've just seen an example of phishing where people are influenced to give away their personal information, but in fact people are often the main reasons why network succumb to attacks and have data loss. Now, social engineering is a method used by criminals, and it's the act of manipulating people to give away personal information or making mistakes when it comes to correct practices when working on a network. So in addition to phishing, people can be duped into downloading viruses and other malware. They could be tricked into giving away their passwords. And the biggest way around this is to educate people about the tricks that criminals use. So if people are aware of the way that they could be duped into doing something, then they're less likely to fall for those tricks. Now, a brute force attack is another threat, and this isn't a physical attack. It's not brute force in terms of picking up a computer and running out the door with it. Brute force attacks is a way of trying to hack a password. So what they'll do is they will use trial and error to try thousands and thousands and thousands of different passwords against a particular username in the hope that eventually the combination of characters used will be the correct one. So they'll repeatedly try to log in with one password after another, and this is quite easily reduced. This threat is quite easily reduced, just making sure that perhaps a system will lock after there's 3 unsuccessful password attempts, and certainly people changing their password regularly means that there's less chance of the criminals actually uncovering the correct password. Denial of service attack. You may well have heard about these attacks in the news, and this is just a method to bring down a website by making the web server's resources be under so much pressure that they just can't cope. So often a criminal will have lots of different computers, perhaps virtual machines, and they will all try to repeatedly access a particular website at the same time. And the sudden massive traffic will just put the web server under so much pressure that it can't cope and the website will crash. Criminals might then demand money to stop the attack. Sometimes criminals will do things like this just to punish websites that they deem perhaps corrupt or perhaps immoral. So it might not just be about money, it might be a politically motivated attack. Another threat is data interception. So often data is transferred across a network wirelessly, and it's fairly easy to intercept that data. But what isn't very easy is reading that data if it's been encrypted. So ensuring that all data that is transferred across a network is encrypted is really important, because otherwise criminals will use things called packet sniffers to sniff out data packets, decode them, and be able to steal passwords and bank numbers. But obviously if the data is encrypted, scrambled if you like, then it will be unreadable even if they were to intercept these data packets. An SQL injection is another threat. Now, SQL is structured query language, and it's used to look up data on a database, perhaps write to a database, read from a database, and so on. So every time you log into your account, whether it's at school or whether it's at home, you'll add a password, you'll add your username, and when you press enter in the background, these two things, the username and the password, will be added to an SQL statement so that you can actually the computer can look up your username and the associated password in the database, so that if they match, then they'll allow you to enter. But if the password you've entered doesn't match the one that's stored on record, then it won't allow you to enter. So here's an example SQL statement. So select the account where the username is bjones and where password is password. So with an SQL injection, what you can do is you can bolt on some SQL code at the end of the password. So you can alter it slightly to allow you to have a lot more, gain access to many more accounts. So it might be something like select account where username equals bjones and where password equals password, or star, and the star represents a wildcard, so could be anything. So most websites will have measures in place to validate that only a password is entered and no extra SQL code. That's one way to get around an SQL injection. Network policies are another really important part of any network, and if they're written poorly, then that can be a real security threat. So a policy is just a set of rules, and every network has several policies. They perhaps will have rules which dictate how users should use the system. Perhaps they need to use complex passwords, have different levels of access for different people in the organization, perhaps lock computer if the user leaves the desk. So if these policies are poor, if they're not followed by the people within the organization, then there is a risk of security being breached. And as we've heard before, people are the weakest point when it comes to system security. So as long as they follow the rules, then that should be fine. But people are very good at forgetting these things or think that they're not that important. So it's important that people are held to account in order to follow these policies. So we've had a look at a lot of threats. Now let's have a look at ways to try and minimize those threats. So penetration testing is one thing that a company could do, and what this is where they invite some experts to simulate a load of attacks, for example a denial of service attack or a brute force attack, and by doing so, by sort of mimicking these attacks, they hopefully will be able to find weaknesses in the system, and then they can summarize those weaknesses to the company, who can make improvements to the system. And due to the fact that things change very, very quickly when it comes to technology, it's important that this form of testing is done very regularly and people are up to date with the latest attacks that criminals are using. Okay, so another important security measure is network forensics. Now, these themselves don't actually prevent an attack. Network forensics software will just monitor network traffic, but in the event of an attack, then this monitoring can play an important role in finding out how the attack was carried out, and therefore can make improvements to the system. Network policies, we've seen, if written badly, can be a real problem for system security, but if written well and if followed, then network policies can play a really important part in keeping a system secure. So every network should have policies. One policy that it should have is an acceptable use policy, which may include procedures such as making sure you've got a complex password, having different levels of access, locking computers if people leave their desk, not allowing users to install software or download files from the World Wide Web, and not allowing the use of USB memory sticks. Another really important policy is a backup policy. So this may include rules as to who's responsible for backing up data, when they should be backing up the data, where it should be backed up as well. And finally, there should also be a disaster recovery policy, which should dictate who is responsible for actually recovering the data from the backup, and whereabouts that should be taken from, and how the system should how the system can actually get back up and running as soon as possible. Antivirus software or anti-malware software is another really good security measure. So these are programs that will find viruses, they will detect them, they might destroy them, and if they can't destroy them, then they will quarantine them. And it's really important to have your antivirus software up to date to be secure. Anti-spyware software is very, very similar. It's just there to ensure that any spyware, if found, is deleted or at least quarantined. Firewalls are vital in system security. Now, a firewall, basically, as we've heard before, data when it's sent across the internet is broken down into small packets. And the part of the computer that actually receives these packets is made up of 256 ports. Now a firewall will monitor the data through these ports, and it will keep certain ports closed so that it only allows data that is coming to expected ports. So for example, incoming emails are usually sent to port 110. So having ports closed protects the computer from hackers, and its continual monitoring will just make sure that any hacker activity can be detected quickly. User access levels is another security measure. So this is where different users of a computer system will be given different access rights depending on their role. So some people maybe at the top of an organization will have access to all parts of the system, whereas others perhaps will have a limited access. And by doing that, it just means that certain sensitive data can only be seen by people that actually need it. So it can keep a system nice and secure. Also, write access, so access to actually overwrite files and make changes to the system, should again only be given to certain people. Otherwise, that could cause an issue for the security of a system if it's in the wrong hands. Passwords, we've seen before. Passwords are there to ensure that network has no unauthorized access, and we've seen how it's really important to keep passwords that are have passwords that are really strong, so long combinations of both letters and symbols and numbers, so they're harder to crack under a brute force attack. They should be changed regularly for the same reason. And encryption. Encryption is vital for system security. Encryption is where data is scrambled before being sent across a network, so that if it is intercepted, it can't actually be read. So to encrypt data, they use an encryption key, which will convert what's known as plain text into ciphertext. And an encryption key is just an algorithm which systematically will change the data within a file. And that algorithm can then be reversed so that we can go from ciphertext back to the plain text when we want to unscramble that data.